Most creative people fail at producing their creative product and monetizing it, right? So your default position, if you're a creative person, is you're going to fail. And so, and that's because it's hard to come up with something new, and it's hard to present it to the market at the right time, and it's hard to market it. Like, those things are really, really difficult. And so what successful entrepreneurs do is they just keep doing it over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And eventually, if they're fortunate, one of their ideas happens to hit the right place at the right time. And so that's also Darwinian in some sense. You know, you're creating all these little enterprises that are sort of alive. They're run by people, after all, and even if your idea is good, that doesn't mean it will be successful. There's so many things that have to be taken into account. So this is partly why persistence, and that's part of conscientiousness, is so useful. It's like, you know, what do they say? If at first you fail, then try again. And that would probably mean try something different rather than the same thing. But persistence is helpful because it enables you to run many, many experiments. And you need to know that the baseline is failure. You know, it's important, because otherwise you'll blame that on yourself. You know, and some of that's useful because there's probably some things that you could improve about yourself. But it's very difficult to go from 0 to 1, you know. If you're starting out as a salesperson, for example, the hardest sale is the first customer. And then, you know, they get easier with each additional customer. You got to know that there are differences in intelligence. It's really important. If you go into a job and you're not smart enough for that job, you're going to have one bloody miserable time. And you're going to make life wretched for the people around you because you won't be able to handle the position. But what you really want to do, as far as I can tell, if you want to maximize your chances for both success and let's say well-being, is you want to find a strata of occupation in which you would have an intelligence that would put you in the upper quartile. That's perfect. Then you're a big fish in a small pond. And you don't want to be the stupidest guy in the room. It's a bloody rough place to be. So, and you probably don't want to be the smartest guy in the room either, because what that probably means is you should be in a different room. If you want to be the best at what you're doing, bar none, then having an IQ of above 145 is a necessity, and maybe you're pushing 160 in some situations, and maybe that's making you one person in 10,000 or even one person in 100,000. And then also, to really be good at it, you probably have to be reasonably stress tolerant and also somewhat conscientious. There's nothing you can possibly do to become more deadly than to improve your facility with language. And the way you do that is by reading, especially great things, and by writing, and by thinking, and by speaking, for that matter. But how could that not be viewed as absolutely central to what education is about? You want to be inarticulate and stumble over everything that you try to think and communicate? Yeah. How are you going to get anywhere? You don't even know who you are under those circumstances. You're this massive feeling that's expressing itself, you know, maybe in violence because you can't find the words, and you stumble around and bump into things, and you're clunky and dull, and you're not witty, you don't sparkle. It's from the uphill climb that we derive our value, and I mean this technically. So almost all the positive emotion we feel, especially the emotion that fills us with enthusiasm, and that's experienced in relationship to a goal. And so in some sense, you want a goal that you can never attain. So you can always move closer to the goal that recedes as you move towards it. You think, well, that's frustrating. It's like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill. But it's not, because as you pursue that goal, you put yourself together and your life does get better and richer and more abundant. And that's why the highest levels of virtue and goal are in some sense transcendent. You want them to be above everything you're doing so you can continually move towards something that's more sublime and better. That's what you are. You're here to live, not to sleep. And the problem with the vision of Mai Tais on the beach is that, well, first of all, that's a vision of drug-induced unconsciousness. Second, it's only going to work for about a week. Third, you're going to be a laughingstock in a month, and depressed and aimless and goalless. You want a horizon of ever expanding possibility. And so it does happen to people because they've staked their soul on the attainment of an instrumental goal. And it can be a pretty high order goal, but then you think, now I'm there, now what? Well, the answer can't be, well, I'm going to live in the lap of luxury and never have to leave the what do you want to be, a giant infant with a gold
with a gold bottle. You never have to do anything but lay in your back and suck. It's like, you see the problem with that as a conceptualization. It's no, you want to be like an active warrior moving uphill with your sword in hand. And that's dynamic, that's exciting.
One of the rules, I think it's rule 4, is compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. And see, that's a game you can win. The possibility that you can make yourself slightly better on a continual basis is, I think that's something that's accessible to everyone. I think that's equivalent to leading a virtuous life. And there is something to be said for virtue and truth, you know, and that is one thing. Another thing that I've noticed about people who've been phenomenally successful is that they really do everything they can to live a truthful life. And you can get a bloody long ways by being honest. Lay a disciplinary structure on yourself, get the chaos in check, and then you can move towards a state that's freer. It's discipline first. Like, look, if you're going to become a concert pianist, there's going to be several thousand hours of extraordinarily disciplined practice. That's the imposition of order on your potential, let's say. But what comes out of that is a much grander freedom. And so virtually every freedom that you have in life that's true freedom is purchased at the price of discipline.
But it's not some casual self-help doctrine. It's that if you don't organize yourself properly, you'll pay for it, and in a big way, and so will the people around you. And I would say, start where you can start. You know, if something announces itself to you as in need of repair, that you could repair, then hey, fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. Now, I often tell people too, fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial. You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you know, you have your routines that you go through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life. And people think, well, they're mundane, I don't need to pay attention to them. It's like, no, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do, hands down.
People are afraid of the truth because often if you reveal it, it causes conflict in the moment. Telling the truth is definitely an adventure. Seeking for sure, but also telling. Another way of going about it is to just say what you think and see what happens. That's an adventure because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So look, there's this old idea that it's necessary to have faith in the truth. And so here's a way of thinking about that. Someone asks you a question and you might think, well, here's the outcome I want, and so here's how I'm going to answer that question. So that's one way of approaching it. But another way of approaching it is, you ask me a question, I'm going to think about the answer, and I'm just going to tell you what I think. And it doesn't matter what the outcome is, because I'm willing to see what the outcome will be, predicated on the idea that there isn't a better outcome than the one that truth produces. Even if it's harsh and terrible in the short term, and sometimes it is, it's like there isn't a better way of doing it. Now, you might say, well, how do you know that? And the answer is, well, I don't know that. That's why it's an article of faith, because I believe, and I believe this deeply, the being that you produce as a consequence of telling the truth is good by definition, even though it's harsh and often uncomfortable because you get in trouble. One of the things that I've really learned recently, or learned to articulate better, is that there's a very tight relationship between aspiration and responsibility. The first question might be, do you need to aspire to something? And the answer is, well, yes, because you have to do something. If you just sit there, you'll die. You can't just sit there. You have to go act out in the world. Okay, so act towards what? Well, that's whatever your aspiration is. You have to have an aim. Okay, well, what should the aim be? Well, it should be something worth doing, let's say. Why do something that you don't feel is worth doing? What do you think's worth doing? Well, if you watch other people and you judge when they're doing something worthwhile, you usually judge them positively if you see that they're taking responsibility, at least for themselves. What, do you want to be completely useless so other people have to take care of you? That's pretty pathetic. And maybe you could get your act together so you're taking care of yourself and your family. And maybe you could even do better than that and take care of yourself and your family and your community. Well, good for you. That's responsibility, and that's an aim. Well, here's one of the things that's cool about that, is that your life doesn't have meaning without aspiration or an aim. Okay, so you need a hierarchy of values. There's got to be something at the top. It's got to be something important. If you don't have that, your life doesn't have any meaning. So if you criticize the hierarchy, or even the idea of hierarchy, you destroy the idea of aspiration. And then people have nothing. Well, that's not helpful. People are built for a struggle and they're built for a weight, and you want to take on a heavy burden voluntarily. See if you can put yourself together. See what you can do out in the world while you're waiting to die. It's an all-in game. It better be worthwhile.
You write in the book, there is no faith and no courage and no sacrifice in doing what is expedient. What do you say to those viewers that don't pursue their dreams and are locked in their careers because they are too afraid to take risks and pursue something meaningful?
Well, the first thing I would say is, well, you should be afraid of taking risks and pursuing something meaningful. But you should be more afraid of staying where you are if it's making you miserable. You're paying a price by sitting there being miserable. You might say, well, the devil I know is better than the one I don't. It's like, don't be so sure of that. The clock is ticking.
Yeah,
and if you're miserable in your job now and you change nothing, in 5 years, you'll be much more miserable and you'll be a lot older.
But isn't it a luxury to pursue what is meaningful? Our viewers have mortgages, they have children,
Yeah.
they have payments and loans. It's
Well,
a luxury to pursue because we lack the resources.
Well, I don't remember now, I'm not talking about what makes you happy. It's a luxury to pursue what makes you happy. It's a moral obligation to pursue what you find meaningful. And that doesn't mean it's easy. It might require sacrifice. If you need to change your job too, let's say you have a family and children and a mortgage, you have responsibilities. You've already picked up those responsibilities. You don't just get to walk away scot-free and say, well, I don't like my job, I quit. That's no strategy. But what you might have to do is you think, well, this job is killing my soul. All right, so what do I have to do about that? Well, I have to look for another job. Well, no one wants to hire me. It's like, okay, maybe you need to educate yourself more. Maybe you need to update your curriculum vitae, your resume. Maybe you need to overcome your fear of being interviewed. Maybe you need to sharpen your social skills. Like, you have to think about these things strategically. If you're going to switch careers, you have to do it like an intelligent, responsible person. That might take you a couple of years of effort to do properly. We're built for struggle, us human beings. We're built to contend with the world. We're built to contend with reality. You want a challenge, and the best way that you can take on a challenge, because a challenge fortifies you. So you don't want to be secure, you want to be strong. And you get strong by taking on optimal challenges. And so you lay out your destiny in the world, and you take the slings and arrows of fate, and you make yourself stronger while you're doing so. And you might fail, and fortune might do you in, but it's your best bet. And, you know, people have extracted unbelievable successes out of catastrophic failures. And I'm not saying that in a naive way. I know perfectly well what happens to people. You know, you're doing fine in life and then you get cancer, and then 6 months later you're dead. And all the heroism in the world isn't going to save you at that point. But that's not the point. That's not the point. Life is bounded by mortality, but that doesn't mean that you don't get out there and contend, and you develop by contending, and you minimize the net amount of suffering in the world. And that's something, man, that's something to do.
People don't get what they want is because they don't actually figure out what it is. And the probability that you're going to get what would be good for you, let's say, which would even be better than what you want, right? Because, you know, you might be wrong about what you want easily, but maybe you could get what would really be good for you. Well, why don't you? Well, because you don't try. You don't think, okay, here's what I would like if I could have it. And I don't mean in a way that you manipulate the world to force it to deliver you goods for status or something like that. That isn't what I mean. I mean something like, imagine that you were taking care of yourself like you were someone you actually cared for. And then you thought, okay, I'm caring for this person. I would like things to go as well for them as possible. What would their life have to be like in order for that to be the case? Well, people don't do that. They don't sit down and think, all right, you know, let's figure it out. You've got a life. It's hard, obviously. It's like 3 years from now, you can have what you need. You got to be careful about it. You can't have everything. You can have what would be good for you, but you have to figure out what it is, and then you have to aim at it. Well, my experience with people has been if they figure out what it is that would be good for them, and then they aim at it, then they get it.
And it's strange because they don't it's a strange thing. It's not quite that simple because, you know, you may formulate an idea about what would be good for you, and then you take 10 steps towards that and you find out that your formulation was a bit off, and so you have to reformulate your goal. You know, so you're kind of going like this as you move towards the goal. But a huge part of the reason that people fail is because they don't ever set up the criteria for success. And so, since success is a very narrow line and very unlikely, the probability that you're going to stumble on it randomly is 0. And so there's a proposition here, and the proposition is, if you actually want something, you can have it. Now the question then would be, well, what do you mean by actually want? And the answer is that you reorient your life in every possible way to make the probability that that will occur as certain as possible. And that's a sacrificial idea, right? It's like, you don't get everything, obviously, but maybe you can have what you need, and maybe all you have to do to get it is ask. But the asking isn't a whim or today's wish. It's like, you have to be deadly serious about it. You have to think, okay, like, I'm taking stock of myself, and if I was going to live properly in the world, and I was going to set myself up such that being would justify itself in my estimation, and I don't mean as a harsh judge, exactly what is it that I would aim at? Sit on your bed one day and ask yourself, what remarkably stupid things am I doing on a regular basis to absolutely screw up my life? And if you actually ask that question, but you have to want to know the answer, right? Because that's actually what asking the question means. It doesn't mean just mouthing the words. It means you have to decide that you want to know. You'll figure that's out so fast it'll make your hair curl. Every time you learn something, you learn because something you did didn't work. And that exposes you to the part of the world that you don't understand. Every time you're exposed to a part of the world that you don't understand, you have the possibility of rebuilding the structures that you use to interpret the world. That's often why it's more important to notice that you're wrong than it is to prove that you're right. One of the things that you're supposed to learn in university is precisely that. It might be useful to listen to people that annoy you on the off chance that they know something that, if they tell you, you can use instead of dying. Talking to people who agree with what you say is like walking around in a desert. You already know everything that they say. The reason you're associating with them in that situation is so that they never say anything that challenges you, because you're afraid that if you go outside of what you understand, that you won't be able to tolerate the chaos. But it isn't the case. People have an unbelievable capacity to face and overcome things they don't understand. And not only that, that's essentially what gives life its meaning. The Buddhists say life is suffering. And you think, well, if that's the case, why bother with it? And people do ask that question, and they ask it in ways that result in their own destruction, and worse, in the destruction of others. So, for example, people who become particularly cruel, particularly in a genocidal manner, are more than willing to dispense with as many human beings as they can possibly train their sights on, because they're so disgusted by the nature of human limitation that they'd rather eradicate it. And lots of people become suicidal because they can't bear the conditions of their own existence. And suffering is real, and it's inescapable. So the question is, what do you do about it?
Now, this young man told me that his life lacked purpose and direction and meaning, and that he was nihilistic until he read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is a book I actually like quite a bit. I've read it 3 times at different decades of my life. And one of the things that's very interesting about that book is that it's an examination of the idea of quality, of the idea that there are qualitative distinctions between things, and that we have an instinct to make qualitative distinctions. And so a qualitative distinction is simply, this is better than that, which is a judgment. Okay, now what Ratzinger is hypothesizing is that the person in and of, you know how the idea, the modern idea is you're supposed to accept yourself. I think that's an insane idea, by the way. Really, I can't think of a more nihilistic idea than that you're already okay. It's like, no, you're not. And the reason you're not is because you could be way more than you are. And so what do you want to be? You want to be okay as you are? Or do you want to strive towards what's better? And this young man, this Australian, he said that the reason that Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance had such an impact on him was because he wasn't happy with his current mode of being, right? He didn't consider
the manner in which he conducted himself sufficient. And the fact that the author of Zen, and it was Pirsig, laid out the notion that you could make qualitative distinctions, and there really was a difference between good things and bad things, or great things and evil things. It gives you direction. It gives you the possibility of moving upward. And Ratzinger is pointing out, at least to some degree, that human beings are insufficient in and of themselves and need the movement upward. And so they need to conceptualize something like the highest good, and then to strive for that. And the thing is that there isn't any difference between conceptualizing the good and being judged. Because if you're going to conceptualize the good and move towards it, what you have to do is separate from yourself all those things that aren't good and leave them behind. And that's why the Redeemer and the Judge are the same thing. And one of the things that's really appalling, I think, about our modern world is that we're rejecting the notion of qualitative distinctions. You say, well, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings by saying that one thing is better than another. It's like, okay, fair enough. It's not fun to be cast off with the damned. That's for sure. But if people are in fact insufficient in their present condition, which seems to be the case, I mean, try finding someone who isn't, then if you deny the possibility of qualitative distinction because you want to promote a radical egalitarianism, then you remove the possibility of redemption, because there's no movement towards the good. And it seems to me that it's a catastrophe to sacrifice the good for it's a catastrophe to sacrifice the good for the equal. Because for us to be equal would mean, as far as I can tell, that we would all be equally unredeemed and miserable.
So imagine you're dealing with someone who's hoarding. Now, people who are hoarding are often older or neurologically damaged, or they have obsessive compulsive disorder. But then you walk into their house and there's like 10,000 things in their house. There's maybe 100 boxes, and you open up a box, and in the box there's some pens and some old passports and some checks and their collection of silver dollars and some hypodermic needles and some dust and, you know, a dead mouse, and there's boxes and boxes and boxes like that in the house. It's absolute chaos in there. Absolute chaos, not order, chaos. And then you think, is that their house, or is that their being? Is that their mind? And the answer is, there's no difference. There's no difference. So, you know, I could say, well, if you want to organize your psyche, you could start by organizing your room. If that would be easier, because maybe you're a more concrete person and you need something concrete to do. So you go clean up under your bed, and you make your bed, and you organize the papers on your desk, and you think, well, just exactly what are you organizing? Are you organizing the objective world, or are you objecting your field, or are you organizing your field of being, like your field of total experience? And Jung believed that, and I think there's a Buddhist doctrine that's sort of nested in there, that at the highest level of psychological integration, there's no difference between you and what you experience. Now you think, well, I can't control everything I experience, but that's no objection, because you can't control yourself anyway. So the mere fact that you can't extend control over everything you experience is no argument against the idea that you should still treat that as an extension of yourself. So you could say, well, let's say you have a long-standing feud with your brother. Well, is that a psychological problem? Is that him? Is it a problem in the objective world, or is it a problem in your field of being? And it's very useful to think that way, because you might ask, what could you do to improve yourself? Well, let's step one step backwards. The first question might be, why should you even bother improving yourself? And I think the answer to that is something like, so you don't suffer any more stupidly than you have to. And maybe so others don't have to either. It's something like that. You know, like there's a real injunction at the bottom of it. It's not some casual self-help doctrine. It's that if you don't organize yourself properly, you'll pay for it, and in a big way, and so will the people around you. Now, and you could say, well, I don't care about that, but that's actually not true. You actually do care about that, because if you're in pain, you will care about it. And so you do care about it, even if it's just that negative way, you know. It's very rare that you can find someone who's in excruciating pain who would ever say, well, it would be no better if I was out of this. It's sort of, pain is one of those things that brings the idea that it would be better if it didn't exist along with it. It's incontrovertible. So you get your act together so that there isn't any more stupid pain around you than necessary. Well, so then the question might be, well, how would you go about getting your act together? And the answer to that, and this is a phenomenological idea too, it's something like, look around for something that bothers you and see if you can fix it. So now you think, well, let's say you go into you can do this in a room. It's quite fun to do it just when you're sitting in a room, like a room, maybe your bedroom. You can sit there and just sort of meditate on it and think, okay, if I wanted to spend 10 minutes making this room better, what would I have to do? And you have to ask yourself that, right? It's not a command, it's like a genuine question. And things will pop out in the room that you like, there's a stack of papers over there that's kind of bugging you, and you know that maybe little order there would be a good thing, and there's some rubbish behind your computer monitor that you haven't attended to for like 6 months, and the room would be slightly better if it was a little less dusty and the cables weren't all tangled up the same way. And like, if you allow yourself just to consider the expanse in which you exist at that moment, there'll be all sorts of things that'll pop out in it that you could just fix. And I might say, well, if you were coming to see me for psychotherapy, the easiest thing for us to do first would just be to get you to organize your room. You think, well, is that psychotherapy? And the answer is, well, it depends on how you conceive the limits of your being. And I would say, start where you can start. If something announces itself to you, which is a strange way of thinking about it, as in need of repair, that you could repair, then, hey, fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. I often tell people too, fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial, right? You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you have your routines that you go through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life. And people think, well, they're mundane, I don't need to pay attention to them. It's like, no, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do. Hands down. All you have to do is do the arithmetic. You figure it out right away. So 100 adjustments to your broader domain of being, and there's a lot less rubbish around, and a lot fewer traps for you to step into. And so that's in keeping with Jung's idea about erasing once you've got your mind and your emotions together, and once you're acting that out, then you can extend what you're willing to consider yourself and start fixing up the things that are part of your broader extent. Now, sometimes you don't know how to do that. So you might say, imagine you're walking down Bloor Street and there's this guy who's like alcoholic and schizophrenic and has been on the streets for 10 years. He sort of stumbles towards you and, incoherently mutters something. That's a problem. And it would be good if you could fix it, but you haven't got a clue about how to fix that. You just walk around that and go find something that you could fix, because if you muck about in that, not only is it unlikely that you'll help that person, it's very likely that you'll get hurt yourself. So, just because while you're experiencing things announce themselves as in need of repair doesn't mean that it's you right then and there that should repair them. You have to have some humility. You don't walk up to a helicopter that isn't working and just start tinkering away with it. You have to stay within your domain of competence. But most of the time, if people look at their lives, it's a very interesting thing to do. I like the idea of the room, because you can do that at the drop of a hat. You go back to where you live and sit down and think, okay, I'm going to make this place better for half an hour. What should I do? And you have to ask, and things will just pop up like mad. And it's partly because your mind is a very strange thing. As soon as you give it a name, a genuine aim, it'll reconfigure the world in keeping with that aim. That's actually how you see to begin with. And so if you set it a task, especially, you have to be genuine about it, which is why you have to bring your thoughts and emotions together, and then you have to get them in your body so you're acting consistently. You have to be genuine about the aim, but once you aim, the world will reconfigure itself around that aim, which is very strange. And it's technically true. The best example of that, you have all seen this video where you watch the basketballs being tossed back and forth between members of the white team versus the black team, and while you're doing that, a gorilla walks up into the middle of the video and you don't see it. It's like, you know, if you thought about that experiment for about 5 years, that would be about the right amount of time to spend thinking about it. Because what it shows you is that you see what you aim at. And that, man, if you can get one thing through your head as a consequence of even being in university, that would be a good one. You see what you aim at. And so because one inference you might draw from that is, be careful what you aim at. Right? What you aim at determines the way the world manifests itself to you. And so if the world is manifesting itself in a very negative way, one thing to ask is, are you aiming at the right thing? Now, you know, I'm not trying to reduce everybody's problems to an improper aim. People get cut off at the knees for all sorts of reasons. You know, they get sick, they have accidents. There's a random element to being, that's for sure. And so you don't want to take anything, even that particular phrase, too far. You want to bind it with the fact that random things do happen to people, but it's still a great thing to ask. Okay, so Rogers was a phenomenologist, and he was interested in, he didn't start his philosophy from the perspective of subject versus object, or from the idea of psyche, like sort of inside you, your mind with its layers. That's not how he looked at it. And so let's go through, well, I'll introduce you to Rogers. I think and then we'll talk about it more next time. I'm going to start, though, with something that I learned from him that I think was of crucial importance. And so we'll set the stage for the further discussion with this. And I'm going to read it to you. Assuming a minimal mutual willingness to be in contact and to receive communications, we may say that the greater the communicated congruence of experience, awareness, and behavior on the part of one individual, the more the ensuing relationship will involve a tendency towards reciprocal communication with the same qualities, mutually accurate understanding of the communications, improved psychological adjustment and functioning in both parties, and mutual satisfaction in the relationship. It's quite a mouthful. What does it mean? Assuming a minimal mutual willingness to be in contact and to receive communications. Okay, we're having a conversation. I'm deciding I'm going to listen to you, right? That's different than how people generally communicate, because usually when they communicate, they're doing something like, okay, we're going to have a conversation and I'm going to tell you why I'm right and I'll win if you agree. Or maybe you're having a conversation where, I don't know what you're trying to do. Maybe you're trying to impress the person you're talking to. So you're not listening to them at all. You're just thinking about what you're going to say next. Okay, so that's not this. This is, you might have something to tell me. And so I'm going to listen on the off chance that you'll tell me something that would really be useful for me to know. And so you could think about it as an extension of the Piagetian, you know, Piaget talked about the fundamentally important element of knowledge being to describe how knowledge is sought, the process by which knowledge is generated. Well, if you agree with me and I find that out, I know nothing more than I knew before. I just know what I knew before. And maybe I'm happy about that because, you know, it didn't get challenged. But I'm no smarter than I was before. But maybe you're different than me, and so while I'm listening to you, you'll tell me something I don't like. Maybe it's something I find contemptible or difficult, whatever. Maybe you'll tell me something I don't know, and then I won't be quite as stupid. And then maybe I won't run painfully into quite as many things. And that's a really useful thing to know, especially if you live with someone and you're trying to make long-term peace with them, is they're not the same as you. And their way they look at the world and the facts that they pull out of the world aren't the same as your facts. And even though you're going to be overwhelmed with the proclivity to demonstrate that you're right, it is the case that two brains are better than one. And so maybe 9 of the 10 things they tell you are dispensable, or maybe even 49 out of 50, but one thing, all you need to get out of the damn conversation is one thing you don't know. And one of the things that's very cool about a good psychotherapeutic session is that the whole conversation is like that. All you're doing is trying to express the truth of the situation as clearly as possible. That's it. And so now Rogers' proposition, and I'll tell you why he derived it, was that if you have a conversation like that with someone, it will make both of you better. It'll make both of you psychologically healthier. So there's an implicit presupposition that the exchange of truth is curative. Well, that's a very cool idea. I mean, it's a very deep idea. I think it's the most profound idea. It's the idea upon which Western civilization, although not only Western civilization, is actually predicated. The idea that truth produces health. But for Rogers, that was the entire purpose of the Psychotherapeutic Alliance. You come to see me because you want to be better. You don't even know what that means necessarily, neither do I. We're going to figure that out together. But you come and you say, look, things are not acceptable to me, and maybe there's something I could do about that. So that's the minimal precondition to engage in therapy. Something's wrong, you're willing to talk about it truthfully, and you want it to be better. Without that, the therapeutic relationship does not get off the ground. And so then you might ask, well, what relationships are therapeutic? And the answer to that would be, if you have a real relationship, it's therapeutic. If it isn't, what you have is not a relationship. God only knows what you have. You're a slave, they're a tyrant, you know, you're both butting heads with one another. It's a primate dominance hierarchy dispute. Oh, I don't know, you're like two cats in a barrel, or two people with their hands around each other's throats. But what you have is not a relationship. So, all right. We may say that the greater the communicated congruence of experience, awareness, and behavior on the part of one individual, that's a reference to the same idea that I was describing with regards to Jung. So let's say you come and talk to me and you want things to go well. Well, I'm going to have to more or less be one thing, because if I'm all over the place, you can't trust any continuity in what I say. There's no reason for you to believe that I'm capable of actually telling you, I'm capable of expressing anything that's true. So the truth is something that emerges as a consequence of getting yourself lined up and beating all the, what would you call, all the impurities out of your soul.
Any advice for students here?
Yeah, read great books. Really, man. You've got this 4-year period that has been carved out of your lives by society. It's given you an identity, like a high quality identity, and freedom at the same time. And you're not going to get that again in your life. You've got a respectable identity, university student, and complete freedom associated with that, or as near as you're ever going to get. And you've got these unbelievable libraries that are full of the writings of people who are intelligent and articulate beyond comprehension. And you know, and you can go there and you can learn all this. And you might think, well, why should you learn it? Well, you learn it to get a job, or you learn it to get good grades, or you learn it to get a degree, and that's all nonsense. It's nonsense. The reason that you come to university to be educated is because there is nothing more powerful than someone who is articulate and who can think and speak. It's power, and I mean power of the best sort. It's authority and influence and respectability and competence. And so you come to university to craft your highest skill, and your highest skill is to be found in articulated speech. And if you're a master at formulating your arguments, you win everything. And better than that, when you win everything, everyone around you wins too. Because to transform yourself into, let's consider your transformation to something approximating the logos, it means you shine a light on the whole world. Well, there's nothing more exciting to do than that. There's nothing better you can possibly do. And to think that you're coming to university to be, you know, trained to have a job, it's like, great, that's a hell of a lot better than being unemployed and covered with Cheeto dust while you're snacking away in front of your video game in the basement. But it's not and I don't have anything against video games, by the way, but it's hardly a triumphant call to being in the world, and that's what university should be calling for. It's like, God, you people, I know what Harvard students are like. I taught here for 5 years. You people are spectacular. You're spectacular. You're all capable of being world beaters. You transform yourself into something that's articulated and sensible and grounded in history and knowledgeable and wise, man. You can do anything you want, and hopefully anything you want for good. Because if you have any sense, everything you want to do would be for the good, because there's nothing more compelling or meaningful or useful in combating the tragedy of life than to struggle with all your soul on behalf of the good. And the universities have forgotten that. It's why everyone's bailing out of the humanities, and they should. The humanities are corrupt. And they're corrupt because they're not telling students this. It's so bloody obvious. It's like, learn to think, learn to speak, learn to read.
It makes you a superpower, an individual superpower. I don't understand why that isn't just told to students. It's not that hard to understand, and everyone wants to hear it. It's like, really? I could do that? I could do that? It's like, yeah, really, you could do that. And the whole society around you has labored for really thousands of years to provide every single one of you with this spectacular opportunity that you have while you're undergraduates and graduate students here, man. Everyone's just praying that you would come here and manifest everything that you could manifest. And that's what you should be doing instead of waving placards and complaining about how you're oppressed, for God's sake. You see these Yale students complaining about their oppression. It just leaves me aghast. It's like, well, we're against the ruling class. It's like, no, you're baby ruling class members. You're young. The only reason you're not rich is because you're young. You know, that's the best. Really, if you look at the 1% even, the dreaded 1%, you know, most of those people are old. Why? Well, when you progress through life, if you're reasonably successful, you trade in your promising youth for your wealthy old age, but you're still bloody old. Would you trade it? Would you trade your youth for that? Like, if you factor age out of the economic equation, things look a lot different. Well, of course older people have more money. If they have any sense, they've been collecting it for their whole life. Is that somehow unfair? It's not unfair unless you want to be poverty-stricken when you're 70, and you don't want to be poverty-stricken when you're 70. So I just don't understand what's happened to the universities. I can't believe that you're not told when you come the first day, look, man, you're here on a heroic mission. You're going to take your capacity to articulate yourself to levels that are undreamed of. You're going to come out of here unstoppable. You're going to be able to do anything you want. It's like, that's what you're here for. Instead, you're taught that, well, you know, the world's a pretty oppressive place, and you're probably the bottom of the victim pile, and there's virtually nothing you can do about it except, you know, deconstruct the patriarchy. And it's so weak-kneed and so pathetic that universities should be embarrassed that that's what they're peddling to students. I'm embarrassed by it. You know, I've gone on public record telling parents, bloody well send your boys to trade school, because at least they'll learn something useful. And that's a terrible thing for someone like me to say, because I do believe that being articulated and educated in the highest possible manner there's nothing that's better for you and for society. And why have the universities forgotten this? Well, that's postmodern neo-Marxism for you, you know, and the philosophy of intense resentment and oppression and group identity, and God, it's just pathetic.
Dr. Peterson, I think a lot of students here would agree with you that one of the main purposes of education at college, particularly at Harvard, is to develop their sense of articulation, their ability to read, their ability to critically think. But then what comes after? Particularly at Harvard, there's a big discussion on what is a good life? What does it mean to use those skills that we get here, and then we graduate? What do we do from there?
Stop unnecessary suffering. That's what you do. You know, that's your calling. It's like you say, well, what do you do after you graduate? Well, if you graduate articulated and powerful, there will be people giving you so many opportunities you won't even be able to keep up with them. You know, I've worked with very, very competent people in many different domains in my life, hyper-competent people. And I can tell you some very interesting things about hyper-competent people. The first thing is they are not selfish, and they're not greedy. And one of the great pleasures in their lives is to find people who have the capacity to also be hyper-competent and to open doors for them as rapidly as they can possibly be opened. They delight in that, because there's very few things that are more intrinsically meaningful if you're an accomplished person than to find young people who have the possibility of being accomplished and say, hey, look, here's an opportunity for you. It's like, go out there, man, kill it. And then they go out there and kill it, and you think, right on, man. Here's another opportunity. Why don't you go out there and nail that too? And you think, no, they're all hoarding their wealth, and they're not going to share it with anyone. It's like, that's absolute, complete rubbish. And so you don't even have to worry about what you're going to do after you graduate from here if you turn yourself into half of what you could be, because people will be dying to offer you every opportunity that you can possibly make use of. So it's a moot point. The world is always desperately short of people who can think and speak. And you think, well, I won't be made use of. Well, first of all, you can't say that if you're at Harvard, for God's sake. I mean, people already figured out who you are. They've already figured it out. And they're offering you the world on a gold platter. They take it. It's yours. Take it. It's like, great, man. Put yourself together and deserve it. That would be great. And that's what everyone wants. It's what your parents want. It's also what you want. You know it. It's what you want. It's what women want from men. It's what men want from women. It's like for you to be who you could be. And the highest faculty of the human being is articulated speech. It's the divine faculty. And there is nothing more powerful than that. There's nothing that's even in the same league. And so if you don't have faith in that, then your priorities are misplaced. And I can't even understand why you wouldn't have faith in that being, say, Harvard students, because look where it's got you already. You know, you're already sitting on top of the world. So deserve it, make use of it. Right? Go out there and fix things up. That's what you need to do. There's lots of things that need to be fixed up. And what you want to do is burden yourself with so much responsibility that you can barely stand. And then you'll get stronger trying to lift it up. And you won't be asking, what should I be doing with my life? Or what's the meaning of life? Or any of that. It'll be self-evident. It's self-evident. At minimum, you can say, there's more suffering in the world than there should be. And I could probably do something about that. And you can do something about that. So go do something about it. And then there'll be less suffering in the world. And then when you're 80, you can look back on your life and say, well, you know, there's less suffering in the world than there would have been had I known it existed. And you don't have to even have a sense of ultimate destiny or even any sort of theistic belief to regard that as a positive good. Like, I think it goes beyond the mere pragmatic utility of addressing the world's ills, because I think we do live in a world that has a transcendent reality as well as the reality that we can detect. But even independently of that, it doesn't matter. It's like, I mean, this is part of the reason I like people like Bill Gates is a great example, man. That guy he's after 5 major diseases at the same time, right? He's trying to wipe out polio. He's trying to wipe out malaria. Yeah, exactly. He's trying to wipe out malaria. It's like, well, what should you do with your life? Well, you know, take a look at Bill Gates and see if you could do something like that. That would be good.
Well, one of the things that I think can be really useful, and this is also a skill that will serve you well for the rest of your life, is to start using a schedule, like a Gmail calendar, and schedule in studying time, for example. Now, so I've got some thoughts about using a schedule. People often don't like schedules because it's like developing your own tyrant. You know, it's, okay, well, here's a whole bunch of things I have to do tomorrow. That's my schedule, and I better stick with it, or I'm a bad person, I'm a failure. And that's not the right way to go about it, the scheduling. What you want to do with the schedule is design the day that you would like to have. Now, some of that's going to involve responsibilities that you have to live up to, or your life will get worse. Right? So, but I would say, if you're trying to start learning how to manage your school stress, is like, schedule in 10 minutes of homework. Maybe before you go to school in the morning, if you can get up. You probably can't, because teenagers have a hard time getting up in the morning. But start with 10 minutes. See if you can train yourself to sit down for 10 minutes after dinner, some regular time, and do 10 minutes of homework. And that's it. Put that in there as a goal. And then maybe if you've done your 10 minutes of homework, you can schedule in, I don't know, 15 minutes of playing a video game if you want, some sort of reward. But start figuring out how to organize your day so that you get to do the things that you want to do, and you do some of the things that you have to do in a manner that you think you could actually do, in a manner that would be sustainable across time. And that, like, the part of your brain that makes you anxious is really unhappy if you don't have a plan. And so one of the fastest ways to start to deal with too much negative emotion, too much stress-related negative emotion, is to make a plan and to make it concrete. And so I would say, and a schedule is an unbelievably useful way of doing that. And you think, in my mind, in your mind, why am I filling out this calendar for the week? Well, so I know what I'm doing, so that I'm not anxious, so that I'm doing things I want to do, so I have something to look forward to, and so that I'm doing things that I have to do, so that my life doesn't go spiral downhill and make me more miserable and resentful and bitter. And so you can start to use a schedule as your friend, and like, that'll take a year of practice to get good at. So if it doesn't work well in the first week, don't give up. Just keep doing it until you get yourself disciplined and they are able to stick more and more to your plans. And that will help you so much in your life, you just can't believe it.
So what you want to do is chop up that overwhelming infinity into a set of manageable tasks. And you want to think, well, you know, some of those tasks might be like, well, maybe you could put some order into your room, you know, or maybe you could make your room a little bit more beautiful, or maybe you could think of one thing around the house that you could do that would actually be helpful. And you're doing that to improve your life. That's the point. You're not doing it because someone's shaking a stick at you and telling you that this is what you have to do if you're going to be a good person. That's not the point. And you also, with your schedule, you think, well, I'm going to design this schedule for someone I like. And that person that I'm designing the schedule for that I like is going to be me. And so it isn't the schedule of a slave master to a slave. It's a negotiated schedule that you arrange with yourself so that you can have a decent life. But it's a very powerful tool to have a calendar at your disposal. And if you can learn to use that young, just put a few things in it. Put in your classes, put in a few assignments, put in some things that you might want to do. Just start stupidly and badly, and you'll get good at it and assume you'll get good at it over about a year, and that'll change your life. Like if you learn to listen to people, if you decide that you're not going to say things that you know to be untrue, and if you learn how to schedule your time, your life will change for the better so much that you won't believe it, and that will keep happening more and more and more and more as you get older. So it's a great thing to start practicing if you could start practicing that when you're a teenager, and you get that under control by the time you're 18, you'll be absolutely deadly. You'll be so far ahead of other people who don't do any of that you won't believe it, and you'll just continue to accrue benefits as a consequence. Well, the thing is that, or one of the things is that, you know, you are going to be putting up with other people's problems and troubles for the rest of your life. And what you want to do is live your life in a manner that makes all of that tolerable. And so I would say, with the scheduling and with the attempt to speak honestly, and with the development of goals that are valuable to you, you're going to be occupied enough with your own life and see enough of the quality of that life so that you'll be able to tolerate a fair bit of noise and stress coming at you from other directions. And I would also say that the more that you put yourself together in the manner that we've already discussed, the better other people will treat you, and the less unnecessary suffering and distress that you're going to encounter. And I would say, and I'll close with this, I would say to your viewers, don't underestimate the utility of getting your act together. Another thing you can do is, and this is like deciding that you're going to stop saying things that you know not to be true. The other thing is, you could decide to stop doing things that you notice make you weak. And it's a game that you're playing with yourself. It's like you're out with your friends, you do something maybe because you think it'll make you popular, and you notice that makes you feel kind of subordinate and weak, and think, aha, I shouldn't do that again. I don't know exactly what it is that I did wrong, but it made me feel weak. It made me feel like I was coming apart at the seams. It's not the thing I should repeat. So you try to do things that make you stronger. You try to say things that make your speech more true and accurate. You try to aim at things that you think are worth attaining, and you get yourself disciplined and in order, and that will do. There's nothing else you can do in your life that will be of more benefit to you and to other people simultaneously. And if you could start that when you're a kid, man, I tell you, you'll be so far ahead. You'll be so far ahead by the time you're 18 or 19 that it'll be like you're in a different universe.
Like, you don't need to have all these things, but you better have most of them. Family, friends, career, educational goals, plans for, you know, time outside of work, attention to your mental and physical health, etc. You know, that's what life is about. And if you don't have any of those things, well, then all you've got left is misery and suffering. So that's a bad deal for you. So once you set up that goal structure, let's say, and that's really in many ways that's what you should be doing at university. That's exactly what you should be doing, is trying to figure out who it is that you're trying to be, right? And you aim at that, and then you use everything you learn as a means of building that person that you want to be. And I really mean want to be. I don't mean should be, even those things are going to overlap. And it's important to distinguish between those, because that's partly, and this is back down to the micro routine analysis. So if I was saying, well, you're going to try to make yourself more industrious. Okay, number one, specify your damn goals, because how are you going to hit something if you don't know what it is? That isn't going to happen. And often people won't specify their goals too, because they don't like to specify conditions for failure. So if you keep yourself all vague and foggy, which is real easy, because that's just a matter of not doing as well, then you don't know when you fail. And people might say, well, I really don't want to know when I fail, because that's painful. So I'll keep myself blind about when I fail. That's fine, except you'll fail all the time then. You just won't know it until you've failed so badly that you're done. And that can easily happen by the time you're 40. So I would recommend that you don't let that happen. So that's willful blindness, right? You could have known, but you chose not to. Okay, so once you get your goal structure set up, you think, okay, if I could have this life, looks like that might be worth living, despite the fact that it's going to be, you know, anxiety provoking and threatening, and there's going to be some suffering and loss involved and all of that. Obviously, the goal is to have a vision for your life such that, all things considered, that justifies your effort. Okay, so then what do you do? Well, then you turn down to the micro routines. It's like, okay, well, this is what I'm aiming for. How does that instantiate itself day to day, week to week, month to month? And that's where something like a schedule can be unbelievably useful. Google Calendar. It's like, make a damn schedule and stick to it. Okay, so what's the rule with a schedule? It's not a bloody prison. That's the first thing that people do wrong. They say, well, I don't like to follow a schedule. Well, it's like, well, what kind of schedule are you setting up? Well, I have to do this, then I have to do this, then I have to do this, you know, and then I just go play video games, because who wants to do all these things that I have to do? It's like, wrong. Set the damn schedule up so that you have the day you want. That's the trick. It's like, okay, I've got tomorrow. If I was going to set it up so it was the best possible day I could have, practically speaking, what would it look like? Well, then you schedule that. And obviously there's a bit of responsibility that's going to go along with that, because if you have any sense, one of the things that you're going to insist upon is that at the end of the day, you're not in worse shape than you were than at the beginning of the day, right? Because that's a stupid day. If you have a bunch of those in a row, you just dig, you know, you dig yourself a hole and then you bury yourself in it. It's like, sorry, that's just not a good strategy. It's a bad strategy. So maybe 20% of your day has to be responsibility and obligation, or maybe it's more than that, depending on how far behind you are. But even that, you can ask yourself, okay, well, I've got these responsibilities. I have to schedule the damn things in. What's the right ratio of responsibility to reward? And you can ask yourself that, just like you'd negotiate with someone who is working for you. It's like, okay, you got to work tomorrow. Okay, so I want you to work tomorrow. And you might say, okay, well, what are you going to do for me that makes it likely that I'll work for you? Well, you could ask yourself that, you know. So maybe you do an hour of responsibility and then you play a video game for 15 minutes. I don't know, whatever turns your crank, man. But, you know, you have to negotiate with yourself and not tyrannize yourself. Like you're negotiating with someone that you care for, that you would like to be productive and have a good life. And that's how you make the schedule. It's like, and then you look at the day and you think, well, if I had that day, that'd be good. Great. You know, and you're useless and horrible, so you'll probably only hit it with about 70% accuracy, but that beats the hell out of 0, right? And if you hit it even with 50% accuracy, another rule is, well, aim for 51% the next week, or 50.5% for God's sake, or because you're going to hit that position where things start to loop back positively and spiral you upward. And so that's one way that you can work on your conscientiousness, is plan a life you'd like to have. And you do that partly by referring to social norms. That's more or less rescuing your father from the belly of the whale. But the other way you do that is by having a little conversation with yourself about, as if you don't really know who you are, because you know what you're like. You won't do what you're told. You won't do what you tell yourself to do. You must have noticed that. It's like you're a bad employee and a worse boss. And both of those work, you know, for you. You don't know what you want to do, and then when you tell yourself what to do, you don't do it anyways. You should fire yourself and find someone else to be. But you know, my point is that you have to understand that you're not your own servant, so to speak. You're someone that you have to negotiate with, and you're someone that you want to present the opportunity of having a good life to. And that's hard for people because they don't like themselves very much. So, you know, they're always like cracking the whip and then procrastinating, and cracking the whip and then procrastinating. And it's like, God, it's so boring and such a pathetic way of spending your time. And you know what that's like, because you probably waste like 6 hours a day. And I think we did an economic calculation about that a while back, right? Your time's probably worth $50 an hour, something like that. I mean, you're not getting paid that now, but you're young, and so this is investment time, and what you do now is going to multiply its effects in the future. So let's say it's $50 an hour, which is perfectly reasonable. So if you waste 6 hours a day, and you are, then you're wasting about $2,000 a week, or about $100,000 a year. So like, go ahead, but that's what it's costing you every hour. And you need to know what your damn time is worth. So let's say it's not $50, it's 30, whatever. Maybe it's 100, it's somewhere in that range. One of the things you should be asking yourself is, when you spend an hour, was that, well, would have I paid someone $50 to have had that hour? And if the answer is no, it's like, well, maybe you should do something else with your time. And it depends on whether or not you think that your time's worthwhile. But the funny thing about not assuming that is, if you assume your time isn't worthwhile, what happens is you don't just sit around sort of randomly in a state of responsibilityless bliss. What you do is you suffer existentially. And so that seems like a stupid solution.
How do we start to heal the memories of the past, the traumas of the past, so that they don't keep hurting us in the present?
Well, the first thing I would say is, you know, sometimes there's a crisis and well-meaning mental health professionals rush in to discuss the trauma while it's still happening. That's a really bad idea. People are generally traumatized because something actually horrible happened. And dwelling on it in the moment just makes it worse. It's not like anybody has a solution. Here's how you should understand this. You know, someone's just shot up your kid's school. Here's how you should understand this. That'll make it all better. It's like, no, it won't. If you have old baggage, that often comes up if you're having an argument with someone, doesn't it? You know how it is. This is partly why people don't like to have a dispute within a relationship, because it's a thread and you pull on that thread and just, God, that we had another rule. Do not agree with something you don't agree with.
Ooh.
Like if we decide, you and me, that we're doing this, we don't go back and say, well, I didn't really mean it. We don't get to play revisionist with our history. So if you don't agree, fight, object, or hold your peace. Because you see what happens with couples is there's a little fight, and then one says to the other, yeah, but you did this. And then that person says, yeah, I know I did that, but then that was because you did this, and each this gets bigger until what's on the table is, why the hell should we stay together at all?
Right.
And so every fight becomes, why the hell should we stay together at all? So that's another thing you want to do, is you want to have the fight about this thing.
Not about everything.
About the past, not everything. It's like, okay, you were flirting. I think you were flirting more than you should have been. Okay, so I go away and I think, well, okay, maybe I was. Okay, well, then we have to have a discussion about why. And maybe we can solve that. But mostly what we have to do is figure out how to not have that happen again. Okay, so we're going to go see the same couple again. What is it that you want me to do? So I'm the flirtatious one, let's say. What do you want me to do? Well, you have to figure that out. It's like, no, I'm stupid. Like you. We're equally stupid. I need to know what would satisfy you. And you need to figure out what would satisfy you, so I know. And that's also extremely useful, is establish your conditions of satisfaction, make them explicit, let the other person know. So if I have a fight with Tammy, let's say, sometimes I remember to say, okay, what do you want me to do right now? What can I do? What should I say and mean? You know, and you think, well, you shouldn't let the other person put words in your mouth. Well, fair enough. You know, I'm not asking for something false. I'm saying, I'd like to not have this happen. Can you see a way out? Is there something I could do to increase the probability that that's the route we could take? And, you know, sometimes that works. But the other person has to let you know what they would find satisfying.
How does someone release shame in a healthy manner so that it doesn't make them a prisoner of these emotions of the past that hold them back?
Well, you hinted at a few things when you just described what happened to you. Is you said, well, first of all, you know, I thought I was the only person this had ever happened to. It's like, no, it's a universal human experience to one degree or another. Now, you know, I'm not saying everyone was sexually abused, and I'm certainly not saying that some people aren't sexually abused to a degree that's so extreme it's unimaginable, where there are others, you know, get off relatively lightly. But it's still, it's well within the realm of normative human experience that sex goes wrong in some way. At least you regret something that's happened, something you've done or something that was done to you. When you're the only person that something has happened to, that's really not good, right? Because it alienates you even from yourself. You have no idea what to do with that. And so that's sometimes why people find it such a relief to have their illness diagnosed. It's like, oh, this is known. There's a category. Other people have had this experience. Maybe there's a pathway through it. So just knowing that you're not the only person like that can be very helpful. Updating, it's like, you were how old?
5.
Okay, well, one thing to realize when you're 25 and you were abused when you're 5 is that you're not 5 anymore. Right? That the person to whom that happened is no longer there. You're there. But so, you know, you might feel afraid of relationships. You might feel afraid of all sorts of things. But a lot of that was, you're sort of feeling that like that residual 5-year-old. I tell a story about one client I had. She was abused by her older brother, and she told me the story. And I drew a picture in my head while she was, you know, I kind of pictured her at 5 and this hulking teenager, you know, taking advantage of her. But as she told the story, I realized that her older brother was only 2 years older than her. Well, he was 7. It was like, okay, well, she wasn't the victim of a tyrannical male in some sense. They were 2 badly supervised children. Now, that doesn't mean that what he did was right, but she was still the 5-year-old in the memory, but she was 27 or so when she came to see me. And so the first thing I did was just point that out. It's like, think about the 7-year-old, right? For a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old is an adult, but for an adult, a 7 and a 5-year-old are clearly both children. Well, that just changed things somewhat. It made her feel less vulnerable in the moment. What your brain wants from you in relationship to a traumatic memory is indication that you're no longer vulnerable to the same problem. That's what memory is for, right? You remember something bad and you process it so that you change your interpretation or your behavior or the situation or whatever you can change so that it isn't going to happen in the future. And if you do that thoroughly, you'll generally let yourself rest. Well, that's the purpose of memory in general. Right. You make sense of your past behavior so that the good things that happen to you can be duplicated and the bad things can be avoided. It's not to make an objective record of the world. It's to make a functional map of the world that you can apply to the future.
Yeah, how do we let that go? How do we disassociate something that happened a year ago, 10, 20 years ago, that is no longer happening, but seems to be triggering us?
Oh, it's very difficult. Well, I would say, you know, one of the things you need to develop if you've had an experience like the one you had, perhaps, because I don't know the details, you probably need a theory of malevolence. You need an explanation. It's like, how could a person do that? You have to understand it so that you're no longer a victim of it. Because otherwise you can't put the event in a context.
Right.
You know, and sometimes that means the development of a real philosophical sophistication. And that can help because then you can start to separate out malevolence from benevolence, because maybe you're afraid of any intimate relationship now because it's been contaminated with that. And everything's fuzzy and foggy. And so you need to understand the person who did that at least to some degree, so that you can separate that person out from all the other people around you that you encounter in situations that might be reminiscent of it. You know, so you felt vulnerable for perhaps you felt ashamed. All those things have to be gone through. What do you think, you know, when you're ashamed, what elicits that? What are the eliciting cues? What do you think when that happens? All of that has to be taken apart. I said in this Beyond Order book that, you know, if you have a memory older than about 18 months that still bothers you, older than 18 months ago or more.
Got it. Yep.
Otherwise, it's not really in the past, right? It's still happening. Whether you should delve into something, how you should delve into something traumatic that's currently happening is a whole different issue. But if it's an old memory and it still bothers you, it means that you haven't decomposed that experience sufficiently to detach it from the emotion. So imagine when something terrible happens to you, you don't understand it. So then you might say, well, if you don't understand something that's happening to you, how can it be terrible? Because doesn't terrible mean that you understand it? And the answer is, well, you understand things in stages. And the first way you understand a terrible thing is by freezing in terror or running. That's the understanding. It's not conceptual, it's embodied and emotional. And so event terror, that's the first category. Okay, now the next question is, how do you get it out? How do you get out of the terror? Well, you realize that nothing truly dangerous is happening. Well, what if something truly dangerous did happen? Then you elaborate your view of the world to the point where you're no longer vulnerable to that terrible thing. And that's extremely difficult. So the memory of something terrible stays terrible until you effortfully process it and decompose it into, well, often into a much more sophisticated map of the world. And it's really hard to do that.
Stop doing the things that you know are wrong that you could stop doing. Right? So it's a fairly limited attempt. First of all, we're not going to say that you know what the good is or what the truth is in any ultimate sense. But we will presume that there are things that you're doing that for one reason or another you know are not in your best interests. There's something about them that you just know you should stop. They're kind of self-evident to you. Other things you're going to be doubtful about. You're not going to know which way is up and which way is down. But there are things that you're doing that you know you shouldn't do. Now, some of those you won't stop doing for whatever reason. You don't have the discipline, or maybe there's a secondary payoff, or you don't believe it's necessary, or it's too much of a sacrifice, or you're angry or resentful or afraid. Who knows? So forget about those for now. But there's another subset that you could stop doing. It might be a little thing. Well, that's fine. Stop doing it and see what happens. And what'll happen is your vision will clear a little bit. And then something else will pop up in your field of apprehension that you will also know you should stop doing, and that you could stop doing, because you've strengthened yourself a bit by stopping doing the particular stupid thing that you were doing before. That just puts you together a little bit more. And you could do that repeatedly for an indefinite period of time. And you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to ever be able to formulate a clear and final picture of what constitutes the truth and the good. But it does mean that you'll be able to continually move away from what's untruth and what's bad. And you know, that's not a bad start.
You have to treat yourself like you matter, because if you don't, then you don't take care of yourself, and you become vengeful and cruel, and you take it out on people around you, and you're not a positive force. None of that's good. So you suffer more, and so does everyone around you. And there's a malevolence that enters into it. None of that's good. So that's what happens if you don't treat yourself like you matter. And then, well, what happens if you don't treat other people like they matter? Well, you lie to them, you cheat them, you steal, you enter into impulsive relationships with them. They can't trust you. That doesn't go anywhere. They don't like you. You end up alone at best, and maybe like incarcerated at worst. Like, that doesn't work. And so you watch the people around you who thrive, regardless of what they say. they act out the proposition that everyone matters. And then you have a functional society. And I think, okay, well, if when you act out the proposition that everyone matters, you have a functional society, maybe that's evidence that that proposition is true. It's like, I think it's true. It's unbelievable how little genuine encouragement many people need, and how they had none. No one ever said to them and meant it, it's not okay for you to be a weak loser. It's not okay. And the reason it's not okay is because you could be way more than that. And it's a crime, an ethical crime, for you to allow all that necessary potential to go to waste. It hurts you, it hurts your family, it hurts the world. Really, really, it does. And people think, oh, okay, I get it. And they do get it because they know at some level. And the other thing people tell me, you know, they say, well, I've been paying attention to your lectures, developing a vision for my life, trying to tell the truth, trying to adopt more responsibility, and things are way better. But the other story is, you've been able to help me put into words things I always knew to be true, but didn't know how to say, which is a good role for an intellectual to play. And so, well, so that's why this all makes me emotional. It's so good, you know, and so much of this has been covered as if it's political. It's not political, what I'm doing. It's not political. I don't tell people that they're okay the way they are. No, I say, no, you could be way more than you are. And they're relieved about that, you see, because if you're in a dark and terrible place and someone says you're okay the way you are, then you don't know what to do about that. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm having a terrible time and I'm hopeless. You're okay the way you are. Well, then what? That's it? That's where I am? And what do you want to tell a young person? You're 17. You're okay the way you are. It's like, no, you're not. You got 60 years to be better, and you could be way better. You could be incomparably better across multiple dimensions. And in pursuing that better, that's where you'll find the meaning in your life. And that will give you the antidote to the suffering. People have asked me in my book why I wrote it as an antidote to chaos, you know, because, well, there isn't anything technically wrong with chaos. Chaos is a place of great potential. Well, the question is, what's the proper balance between chaos and order? Chaos, potential, and order. Well, the answer is, look, when you're a kid, you're all potential. It's chaotic potential. It can manifest itself in any number of ways. And maybe you don't want to give that up. So you're like Peter Pan. You want to be a kid forever because you don't want to give up the potential. And you look out in the world and all you see are Captain Hooks, you know, who've lost a hand, who are chased by death because that's the clock in the crocodile. It's already got a taste of him. He's terrified by death and he's a tyrant. Well, I don't want to grow up to be that. So I won't be disciplined at all. Well, that's no good, because the way the potential transforms itself into actuality is through discipline. And so then you, as you said, this is the trick though. You have to pick a path of discipline. What path of discipline you have to pick is a different issue. So there could be a rule. The rule might not be follow this rule. The rule might be you have to follow some rules. So it's a meta rule. And the meta rule is you have to discipline yourself. And the issue is, well, how? That's not really the relevant question. You can pick a disciplinary path. That's why I often tell my clients, especially young people, they say, well, I don't know what to do. It's like, that's okay. Nobody does. Go do something. Do the best thing that you can think of. Put the best plan you have into practice. It's not going to be perfect, and it will change along the way. But it will change partly because you become disciplined pursuing the path. And as you become disciplined, you become wiser. And as you become wiser, you become able to formulate better and better plans. So you can start vaguely and confused and develop a plan that's not so great, and you start to implement it, and then you accrue incremental wisdom as you implement your flawed plan, and that enables you to fix the plan. And so that's part of that process of incremental self-improvement as well. You don't want someone else's fate. Man, your fate's enough, and your adventure's enough. It's plenty. It's more than you can ever fully realize. And so that's also part of the reason that we all believe that the individual has some intrinsic dignity. It's don't be so sure that your position and your room is so damn trivial. It might be your attitude towards it that's trivial. And if you're in dire straits and dire circumstances, just look at how much opportunity you have to make things better. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. The same basic idea, right, is that you have to get your markers for success right, because otherwise you can end up in the situation you described, which is that, like, there's always people out there who are doing far better than you on pretty much anything you want to imagine. And if all you're doing is seeing yourself in their reflected light, let's say, then it's going to be pretty damn dismal. But it's not a good comparison, because you shouldn't just compare. Well, first of all, there's danger in just comparing yourself to others, period, because they're not you, and God only knows what struggles they had to undertake to get to where they were, or what burdens they're currently carrying that you're not aware of. You just don't know any of that. But you can certainly contrast yourself with yourself. And that's a lot better. It is the only way. Well, it's also the only way of really measuring anything approximating proper improvement. You can actually tell when you're a little better than you were yesterday.
Right.
So, and you can actually do that. That's another thing that's so interesting about it, is that you can actually make yourself a little better in some way, pretty much, well, I don't know if it's at every moment, but you can certainly do it every day. It's funny. I mean, you know, obviously, if you have a problem and you think about it, you can think up a solution. And it's not obvious how you do that. You know, I mean, it's not like you know how you're manipulating your neurons or something.
Mm-hmm.
It happens of its own accord in some sense, like you can participate in it, I guess, and you can interfere with it, and it seems to take a certain amount of willpower, but it still all happens mysteriously behind the scenes. Life has proximal meanings, right? There's the meaning that you experience when you're engaged in a piece of art, or when you're reading, or when you're engrossed in a movie or in a conversation. There's the meaning that emerges within your relationships with people that you cherish or are enthusiastic with. There's meanings of security and predictability. There's meanings of duty and responsibility and active engagement with your job and your career. There's meanings of aesthetic pleasure. Now, all of those have their value, and each of them has their place. And, you know, maybe there's a hierarchy of value there as well, so that some of those meanings are deeper than others. And then you might say, well, what characterized the deepest of all meanings? And it would be something like relationship with the transcendent, and that would establish a relationship between you and what's always been conceptualized as God, which is generally supposed to be something ineffable, right? It's not definable, but you might think about it as the central animating spirit of the age, or the value around which all other values are organized, or the wisdom of the ages, or the creative spirit that possesses you when you're inspired, or what grips you with enthusiasm at a sports event or at a musical event. All of those things. And we need a relationship with that. And we find our deepest meaning in that relationship. And if we don't find it, I think, if we don't find it in something that's explicitly religious, then we tend to magnify something of lesser value, say something political, into that to fill the void. So yes, life has proximal meanings without God, without eternity, but at the ultimate level, something's lacking. And it's the desire to fulfill that lack that, and maybe the lack itself, that's part and parcel of the religious instinct. So you can kill God, but you can't. That doesn't rectify the hunger for God. And then that hunger seeks out replacements. That's how it looks to me. So, and then, you know, you might also say, well, does that mean you have to believe in God? And I don't think of the proper answer to that is that you need to agree with a propositional statement. Does God exist? Yes. No, like, is this table there? Yes. It's not that kind of relationship. I mean, it's characterized in the Old Testament as a struggle. So Israel means those who struggle with God. And you have to participate in that struggle. And you can do that, weirdly enough, as a believer or as a non-believer. Maybe sometimes more intensely as a non-believer. The issue might be more paramount then, the issue of virtue and the issue of the ultimate orientation. If you're plagued by bouts of depression and anxiety, that does destabilize your identity. So It's almost by definition. But having said that, look, this is when habit and plan and strategy are so useful. So in the periods of depression that I've had, and some of them were long and certainly the most unpleasant experiences of my life. This is when you need a philosophy, let's say, that's allied with your vision and your strategy to sustain you. Because what would happen to me is that, I have a vision, and I suppose the vision is of a world that's better, that's less likely to descend into ideological catastrophe, and where people are more responsible and more awake and more educated and healthier. All of that, a vision of a better world, a world that's less hellish at least, but also a better world, and some sense of what role I might play in that. And so that's very motivating. Like, it's a profound goal to try to make things better. And you can do that locally. You can do that for yourself. You can do that for your family. You can do that for the broader community. And all of that's worth it, man. It's worth making some sacrifices for. It's worth suffering for to some degree. And then you decompose that into the day-to-day and week-to-week strategies and actions that you're undertaking, the plans and the activities that you're putting forward to make that dream a reality, to realize it. And then when the depression and anxiety come along, you think, part of it with depression, it's just bloody endurance. It's like you get up and you work through the next hour, you try to stay on track, you try to implement your strategic plans to the best of your ability, and you hope and you pray that you'll get through it. You'll get through it, and that the darkness will recede, and you stay on track. You eat even though you're not hungry. You get up even though you want to stay in bed. You interact with people even though you'd rather be alone. And it's the benefit of disciplined habits can sustain you. It's like the boat you're rowing in through a terrible storm, leaks and all, and maybe you'll be overwhelmed, but you have the boat and you can row forward, and that's what you've got.
What should happen when you go to university is you should learn how to think and formulate arguments. You should learn to think, speak, and write. That's what the humanities are for. They're to make you dangerous, right? Because if you can think and speak and write, you're deadly. In a complex job, you're exactly what's necessary.
There's nothing you can possibly do to become more deadly than to improve your facility with language. And the way you do that is by reading, especially great things, and by writing, and by thinking, and by speaking, for that matter. But how could that not be viewed as absolutely central to what education is about? You want to be inarticulate and stumble over everything that you try to think and communicate? Yeah. How are you going to get anywhere? You don't even know who you are under those circumstances. You're this massive feeling that's expressing itself, maybe in violence because you can't find the words, and you stumble around and bump into things, and you're clunky and dull, and you're not witty. You don't sparkle.
Learn to write. I'm dead serious. I'm dead serious about that, because writing is formalized thinking. And so the way you write is, first of all, you need a problem. Because why write if you don't have a problem? So this is good advice if you're just writing an essay, by the way, for your classes. It's like, pick a bloody problem that you want to write about, because otherwise it's false right from the start. It's up to you to engage with the material until you find something that grips you, that you desire to investigate. Okay, so you need a problem. Well, the next thing you need to do is, you need to have something to say about the problem. Well, so reading is really good for that. Read as much as you can, get your hands on that addresses the problem. Okay, so now you know a bunch of things, or at least provisionally know them. You at least have access to them. Well, now you start sorting through it. It's like, okay, well, maybe I need to summarize what I've learned, and then I need to iron out the contradictions between what I've learned, and I need to elegantly formulate that, and I need to get my word choice right, and my phrase choice right, and my sentence choice right, and
need to organize the sentences into proper paragraphs and the paragraphs into proper sequence so that I have a coherent argument. And at the same time, what you're doing is you're integrating your own personality at the highest and most abstract level of organization. And you're sharpening your tools and you're putting yourself straight because you're learning to think. You learn to do that by writing. Many, many years, you hone your words. They're the most powerful thing about you, bar none. If you are an effective writer and speaker and communicator, you have all the authority and competence that there is. And so you're at university. Maybe you're taking a humanities degree. Well, what's the humanities degree for? It's to teach you how to think. You learn to think by writing. Now there's more to read, to speak, and all of that, but the best thing you can do is read and write every day. A couple of hours every day. Write about things you find important and see if you can discover what you believe to be true. And that'll build you a foundation. And it's unbelievably practical. Like if you look at people who are phenomenally successful across life, there's various reasons, but one of them is that they're unbelievably good at articulating what they're aiming at and strategizing and negotiating and enticing people with a vision forward. It's like, get your words together, man. That makes you unstoppable. And that's the core of the humanities, that idea. Just get your words together. Make yourself an articulate creature, and then you're deadly in the best possible way. So, and take that seriously. The best thing you can do is teach people to write, because there's no difference between that and thinking. And one of the things that just blows me away about universities is that no one ever tells students why they should write something. It's like, well, you have to do this assignment. Well, why are you writing? Well, you need the grade. It's like, no, you need to learn to think, because thinking makes you act effectively in the world. Thinking makes you win the battles you undertake, and those could be battles for good things. If you can think and speak and write, you are absolutely deadly. Nothing can get in your way. So that's why you learn to write. It's like, and I can't believe that people aren't just told that. It's like, it's the most powerful weapon you can possibly provide someone with. And I know lots of people who've been staggeringly successful and watched them throughout my life. And those people, you don't want to have an argument with them. They'll just slash you into pieces. And not in a malevolent way. It's like, if you're going to make your point and they're going to make their point, you better have your points organized, because otherwise you are going to look like and be an absolute idiot. You are not going to get anywhere.
So let's say you take the example of a SEAL who's got it all, but this literacy. What happens to him compared to someone who has all those skills?
If he can't write well and he's in charge of 6 guys and one of those guys works hard or does something that deserves to be recognized, this is the responsibility of that leader to write that person an award.
Okay, so he can't reward his good workers, his good soldiers.
He can give him a pat on the back, but a pat on the back isn't going to get him promoted. An award is actually worth some points towards your promotion. And the people that are on that board that are giving that reward, they're never going to meet that leader, and they're definitely not going to meet that guy. There's no bias. It's based on this piece of paper that you hand in. You hand in this piece of paper, they read the piece of paper, and they say award approved or award not approved. Mm-hmm. Or you want to do a mission and you send that up the chain of command, and it's the same thing. It gets to a certain point where they're just looking at it and reading and trying to decipher this pile of junk that you put together. And by the way, if I'm in charge and Jordan sends me a concept of operations that doesn't make any sense, why would I possibly let you go out and execute an operation that I can't even understand what it is you're trying to do?
Because what I observed in my own career, and it's so interesting, the parallelism is so interesting but not surprising, is that nothing can stop you if you can write. And it's for the reasons you just laid out. It's like, when you write, you make a case for something, whatever it happens to be. And if you make the best case, well, then you win and you get whatever it is that you're aiming at. And so you're adventurous,
you want to make a mark, is you bloody well better learn how to write. Because if you learn how to write, well, then you can think and you can communicate your thoughts. So not only are you deadly strategically, you become extremely convincing. And then you can go and do anything you want and no one will stop you. And that's never told to people. And I don't really understand why. You know, you hear the pen is mightier than the sword, which is just a cliche unless it's fleshed out. Yeah, well, we're not animals in a zoo. Like we're not camels in a zoo. We're not herbivores, you know, and just because we have enough straw doesn't mean we're going to lose our unbelievable capacity for destructive creation. And we don't know how to harness that. You know, and I've been trying, I suppose, in some sense to meet that desire for a call to adventure with what I'm writing and with my lectures and to use responsibility in this moral domain as a battle that's of sufficient intensity to engage young people, in particular property. It's like, get yourself together, see how difficult that is, see what you can do, put yourself together, stop doing the things you know to be wrong, and see what happens. Put yourself together. And there's been an unbelievable response to that. And I think it's harmless in some sense, or as harmless as such things can be, because it is focused. It's like, change you. Leave the other people alone. Or if you want to change them, maybe you can do it through example. You know, but they're not the problem. You have enough problems with yourself. It's like, well, what are you complaining about? You've got enough to eat. It's like, fair enough, you know, who wants to starve, right? And so it's even hard to fight against. Well, I should be grateful for that. And yes, you should, but it's not enough. And you think about where we came from, our ancestors, what they struggled against. And from the time we were, you know, from our animal forebears all the way up to where we are now, whatever we're made for, it's not Twinkies and TV. You know, it's not willful blindness and the comfort that brings. It's not enough. And so we need this adventure. And that's something we're going to all have to contend with, because if we don't get the adventure right, then we'll get it wrong and it'll lead us in terrible places. One of the things I've said that people have repeated many times, and that it's in memes and you can buy it on, you know, merchandise items and that sort of thing. A good man is a very dangerous man who has himself under control. And no one ever says that. So you say to young men, look, like, your job is to be as dangerous as you possibly can be in every possible direction, and to control that, right? Not to be harmless and slothful and contemptible even in your own eyes. And that way you get the power of the shadow. You don't have to dispense with the anger and the aggression. You can integrate it. And that's way better. I mean, I had a remarkable conversation with Jocko Willink. I felt that it was remarkable. It was very engrossing. And Willink, he's unlike me in many ways. I mean, he's a physical specimen of sort of unparalleled proportions to begin with. He's about 2 feet thick, you know, and he's this military guy, highly disciplined and also extraordinarily morally integrated. And he's an admirable person because the danger is right there under the surface. But he has it rather than it having him. And we're uncomfortable with the idea that that's the proper route for socialization. We try to teach our children that only, you know, cooperative games are acceptable. And they know in their hearts that that's a complete bloody lie. It's not technically sustainable. It's not even conceptually correct. I'm not saying I've solved it. I talk to Bjorn about this a lot. It's like, I love your message. Wouldn't it be wonderful to eradicate absolute poverty? And he does this great job technically of rank ordering global concerns, doing a cost-benefit analysis that's methodologically rigorous, and saying, look, we can devote money here. We'll get a 20-to-1 return, mostly in child nutrition, as it turns out. Couldn't we do an immense amount of good with targeted spending? And the answer is clearly yes. We could eradicate child poverty in the next 15 years. We probably will. We could do great things, but we don't know how to sell it. And that's a huge problem. I've never had more of a response from a crowd than when I draw a relationship between responsibility and meaning. Without fail, that brings the crowd to silence. And it's because that connection hasn't been made explicit sufficiently, I would say, is that we find meaning in responsibility. And there is a messianic call that's embedded in this. And you can translate that into get yourself together, see what you could become. And, you know, much of Beyond Order is exactly that. It's push your limits, move beyond yourself, discipline yourself, but move beyond that discipline. Don't let that order constrain who you could be, because it's not a high enough order yet. And I would say it looks like that is attractive to young people, and perhaps specifically to young men, but not only to young men, not only to the young. So, well, that's a problem that we have to address is, you know, we are doing a lot of things right, but it's not romantic enough. The clinical experience and my lecturing experience has been unbelievably positive in the main, and the clinical experience was positive because I was always on the side of the part of the person that was oriented towards their own health and improvement. That was part of our contractual pact. I'd often make that explicit. It's like, I'm not here for unconditional positive regard. I'm on the side of the part of you that wants everything to be better, and we're going to discover where that is, and we're going to work to facilitate it. And people loved that, and it was so gratifying to engage in that work. It was constantly positive. I worked with a huge variety of people, from people who had nothing, no gifts, and were just off the edges of the world, to people who were unbelievably talented and gifted, the whole gamut. And that was absolutely wonderful to see that range of people. And the lecturing has been the same way. Like the lecture tour I did was immensely positive, too much positive even. You wouldn't think that would be possible, but it is possible. And I'm very positively oriented towards human beings in the main, despite I think we're great, flawed and terribly, but no wonder. No wonder. I mean, the burden we bear is absolutely, it's absurd. The existentialists made much of that. We have an absurd existence. We're aware of our own mortality. God, and we're animals. We're aware of our own mortality. What a burden. And yet here we are. And much of the time we're not corrupt and horrible. It's a miracle. So, you know, it's a word of encouragement. And that's what people are responding so positively to in a time where everyone is told this story that, you know, human activity is all a struggle for power, and that we're fundamentally a destructive force, and that we should rein ourselves in. And I'm not selling that message. It's a word of encouragement. You could be more than you are, and wouldn't that be great for everyone, including you?
If you concentrate solely on your career, you can get a long way in your career. And I would say that that's a strategy that a minority of men preferentially do. That's all they do. They work like 70, 80 hours a week. They go flat out on their career. They're staking everything on the small probability of exceptional status in a narrow domain. But it's hard on them. They don't have a life. It's very difficult for them to have a family. They don't know how to take any leisure activity. Like, they get very one-dimensional. Now, it may be that unidimensionality is the price you have to pay to be exceptional at one thing, right? Because if you're going to be something like a genius level mathematician, and you want to do that or a scientist, say, it's like you're in your lab all the time, you're working 70 hours a week or 80 hours a week, you're smart, you're dedicated, you're unidimensional, and that's how you get to beat all the other people who are doing that. It's the only way. But the problem is you don't get a life. Now, if you love being a scientist and you have that kind of focus of mind, well, first of all, you're a rare person, and second, you're going to pay for it. But fine, more power to you. But it's a risky business to do that. You sacrifice a lot for it, you know. And I would say most often, if you're speaking about having a healthy life, that isn't what you do. You spread yourself out more. So, you know, you have a family, you have some things that you do outside of work that are meaningful to you and useful. You have a network of friends. Well, those 3 things alone, or 4 things alone, are plenty to keep you well oriented. And then if one of those things collapses, You know, everything doesn't go. Now, the price you pay for that is the more you strive to optimize that balance, the less likely you are to be fantastically successful at any single one of them. But you might have a very, you know, if you consider your life as a whole, that might be a winning strategy. One of the things Carl Jung said, I really liked this. He thought that men went after perfection and women went after wholeness. There's something different at the top of the value hierarchy. So perfection would be stake it all on one thing and look for radical success. Not that all men do that, because they don't, but we're talking about extremes, at least with regards to the men that do that. The wholeness idea is more like, well, it's like I want one thing in my life to be 150%, or I want 5 things in my life to be 80%. Well, there's a lot more richness in a life where you have 5 things operating at 80%, but you're not operating at any of them at 150%. So, and I really believe this because I've watched men and women go through their careers now for a long period of time, and one of the things that, there's lots of things that produce this, but one of the things that I've noticed is that mostly women in their 30s bail out of unidimensional careers. They won't do them. They won't put in the 80 hours a week that they would have to put in order to dominate that particular area. And it isn't, the reason that they won't do it is because they decide it's not worth it. And no wonder, because why would that be worth it? You have to ask yourself that. It's like, well, you want to be an outstanding scientist. It's like, okay, really, that's what you want, because that means that's what you do. Because you're competing with other people, you know, they're smart, they're hardworking, and if you want to be at the top, you have to be smarter and work harder than any of them. And working hard means working long hours. I mean, it also means working diligently, but in the final analysis, it's also an additive issue. If I'm smart and hardworking and I can crank out for 70 hours a week, and you do it for 30, it's like, in 2 years, I'm so far ahead of you, you will never, ever catch up. So, anyways. And I think maybe part of the reason too that women are oriented that way more than men, I think there's 2 reasons. One is socioeconomic status does not make women more attractive on the mating market, but it does make men more attractive. And the second is women's time frame is compressed, right? Because guys can always say, well, I'll have kids later, and they can say that till they're like 80. Whereas women, it's like, no way, man, you got to get it together by the time you're, let's say 40, but really probably by 35, but definitely by 40, because otherwise it ain't happening. And that's bloody dreadful. One of the common routes to extreme unhappiness is to want children and not have them. I wouldn't recommend that. You know, you see couples who are in their 30s. 1 couple in 3 over the age of 30 has fertility problems. That's defined as inability to conceive after 1 year of trying. 1 in 3. So it's worth thinking about, because people are very, very unhappy if they want to have kids and then they can't. Man, you're in the medical mill for 10 years if that's what happens to you. We've got a hypothesis that we're still working out that's supported to some degree by the relevant literature. So imagine that you're looking for a stable partner, right? So you might think, well, what do you want in a stable partner? And at least in principle, one of the things you don't want is too much mismatch between you and that person on the 5 fundamental dimensions. So for example, if you're really extroverted and you have a really introverted partner, you're going to engage in continual conflict about how much social activity the 2 of you should subject yourself to. And it's very, very difficult for people who widely differ on those dimensions to come to consensus, because it's not just a matter of opinion, right? It's really a matter of different, if you're looking at extremes, of really different types of people. And the thing about introverts is they just don't enjoy large-scale social interaction that much. One-on-one they're often fine, but in a group they don't like that, and it tires them out. Whereas a real extrovert, it's like you isolate them and they just wither on the vine, because a huge part of what actually motivates them in a positive way is tangled up with social interaction. And so if you're an agreeable person and you have a particularly disagreeable partner, you're also going to run into problems, because the agreeable person will say, whatever you want, whenever, and the disagreeable person will say, well, I'd like to know what the hell you want for a change, and be much more harsh and much more demanding in the situation. And the agreeable person is going to find the disagreeable person harsh and unpleasant, and the disagreeable person is going to find the agreeable person wishy-washy and unable to stand up for themselves. And again, that's actually one of the primary sources of tension between men and women, because women tend to be higher in agreeableness than men. It's about half a standard deviation, which is quite a large difference by psychological standards. And so what that means, I probably haven't got the statistic quite right. If you have a group of men and women and you pick out random pairs, the woman is going to be more agreeable than the man 60% of the time. So that's not an overwhelming proportion, but it's reliable, and it's quite large by psychological standards. So there's the problem with agreeableness. With conscientiousness, well, if you're conscientious, you're industrious and orderly. And orderly people seem to be sensitive to disgust, which is something we'll talk about in detail later. We've had a hard time specifying exactly what makes industrious people industrious, because it's hard to come up with an animal model for that sort of thing, and there's no theoretical model. But our latest idea is that, it's not my idea, it's actually the idea of my graduate student, Christine Brophy, is that industrious people find it unpleasant and unsettling to not be doing something. So it isn't so much that
Okay, well, so that's another issue in some sense that seems to make the postmodernist critique even more correct. How in the world are you going to extract out a canonical interpretation of something like that? It's like it's not possible. But here's the issue, as far as I can tell. So when the postmodernists extended that critique to the world, they said, look, well, a text is complicated enough. You can't extract out a canonical interpretation. What about the world? The world's way more complicated than a text, and so there's an infinite number of ways that you can look at the world. And so how do we know that any one way is better than any other way? And that's a good question. Now, the postmodern answer was we can't. And that's not a good answer, because you drown in chaos under those circumstances, right? You can't make sense of anything. And that's not good, because it's not neutral to not make sense of things. It's very anxiety-provoking. It's very depressing, because if things are so chaotic that you can't get a handle on them, your body defaults into emergency preparation mode, and your heart rate goes up and your immune system stops working, and like you burn yourself out. You age rapidly because you're surrounded by nothing you can control. That's an existential crisis, right? It's anxiety-provoking and depressing, very hard on people. And even more than that, it turns out that the way that we're constructed neurophysiologically is that we don't experience any positive emotion unless we have an aim and we can see ourselves progressing towards that aim. It isn't precisely attaining the aim that makes us happy, as you all know if you've ever attained anything, because as soon as you attain it, then the whole little game ends. Then you have to come up with another game, right? So it's Sisyphus. And that's okay, but it does show that the attainment can't be the thing that drives you, because it collapses the game. That's what happens when you graduate from university. It's like you're king of the mountain for one day, and then you're like surf at Starbucks for the next 5 years, you know? So, yeah. So what happens is that human beings are weird creatures, because we're much more activated by having an aim and moving towards it than we are by attainment. And what that means is you have to have an aim, and that means you have to have an interpretation. And it also means that the nobler the aim, that's one way of thinking about it, the better your life. And that's a really interesting thing to know, because, you know, you've heard ever since you were tiny that you should act like a good person, and you shouldn't lie, for example. And you might think, well, why the hell should I act like a good person, and why not lie? I mean, even a 3-year-old can ask that question, because smart kids learn to lie earlier, by the way. And they think, well, why not twist the fabric of reality so that it serves your specific short-term needs? I mean, that's a great question. Why not do that? Why act morally? If you can get away with something and it brings you closer to something you want, well, why not do it? These are good questions. It's not self-evident. Well, it seems to me tied in with what I just mentioned. It's like, you destabilize yourself and things become chaotic. That's not good. And if you don't have a noble aim, then you have nothing but shallow, trivial pleasures, and they don't sustain you.
And that's not good because life is so difficult, it's so much suffering, it's so complex. It ends and everyone dies and it's painful. It's like without a noble aim, how can you withstand any of that? You can't. You become desperate, and once you become desperate, things go from bad to worse very rapidly when you become desperate. And so there's the idea of the noble aim, and it's not something, it's something that's necessary. It's the bread that people cannot live without, right? That's not physical bread. It's the noble aim. And what is that? Well, it was encapsulated in part in the story of Marduk. It's to pay attention. It's to speak properly. It's to confront chaos. It's to make a better world. It's something like that. And that's enough of a noble aim so that you can stand up without, cringing at the very thought of your own existence, so that you can do something that's worthwhile to justify your wretched position on the planet. So now the literary issue is that, so look, you take a text, you can interpret it a variety of ways, but that's not right. This is where the postmodernists went wrong, because what you're looking for in a text, and in the world for that matter, is sufficient order and direction. So then we have to think, well, what does sufficient order and direction means? Well, you don't want to suffer so much that your life is unbearable, right? That just seems self-evident. Pain argues for itself. I think of pain as the fundamental reality because no one disputes it, right? I mean, even if you say that you don't believe in pain, it doesn't help when you're in pain. You still believe in it, right? You can't pry it up with logic and rationality. It just stands forth as what the fundament of existence, and that's actually quite useful to know. Say, well, you don't want any more of that than is absolutely necessary. And I think that's self-evident. And then you say, well, wait a minute, it's more complicated than that. You don't want any more of that that's necessary today, but also not tomorrow, and not next week, and not next month, and not next year. So however you act now, better not compromise how you're going to be in a year, because that would just be counterproductive. That's part of the problem with short-term pleasures, right? It's like act in haste, repent at leisure. Everyone knows exactly what that means. So you have to act in a way that works now and tomorrow and next week and next month and so forth. And so you have to take your future self into account. And human beings can do that. And taking your future self into account isn't much different than taking other people into account, right? Because I remember there's this Simpson episode, and Homer downs a quart of mayonnaise and vodka. And he says, Marge says, you shouldn't really do that. And Homer says, that's a problem for future Homer. I'm sure glad I'm not that guy. The internal problem is, how do you deal with tragedy and malevolence? And you can say, well, I'm not prepared. It's like, yeah, fair enough. Unsurprising, especially if you were overprotected as a child. It's not a good idea to overprotect your kids, because the snakes are going to come into the garden no matter what you do. And so then you, instead of trying to keep the damn snakes away, what you do is you arm your child with something that can help them chop them into pieces and make the world out of them. So that the trick for human thriving in the face of suffering and malevolence is strength, not protection. It's a completely different idea. We also know this clinically. We know, for example, that if you treat people with exposure therapy for agoraphobia, which is, roughly speaking, the fear of chaos, I would say, the fear of everything, you don't make them less afraid. You make them braver. It's not the same thing. Because with an agoraphobic, see, what happens to them is the fall. They never conceptualize death and suffering. They're naive. Right? It never enters the theater of their imagination, and it's because they're protected from it. But then something happens. This often happens to women in their 40s, because they're the people most likely to develop agoraphobia. Something happens. They've been protected from chaos by authority their entire life. So maybe they had an overprotective father, and then they went to an overprotective boyfriend, and then they went to an overprotective husband. And maybe they were willing to be subjugated to all three of those because of the protection, right? So that's the bargain. They stay weak and dependent, and maybe they have to because that's the only way they can appeal to the person who's hyperprotective. But the price they pay for that is that they're not sufficiently competent. And then something happens in their life, often in their 40s. They develop heart palpitations, maybe as a consequence of menopause. Their heart starts to beat erratically, and they think, oh no, death. It's like, well, who are you going to talk to about that? Right? There's no protection from authority for that. Or maybe their friend gets divorced, or maybe their sister dies, or something like that. It brings up the specter of mortality, and maybe the specter of malevolence and mortality, and it brings it up in a way that authority, recourse to authority, cannot solve. And so then they have panic attacks. What happens? They go out, they get afraid, they feel their heart beating, then they get afraid of their heart beating because they think, oh no, I'm going to die, and they think, oh no, I'm going to die, and I'm going to make a fool of myself while I'm doing it and attract a lot of attention. So the two big fears come up: mortality and social judgment. And then they have a panic attack. It's like fight or flight's gone out of control. Very, very unpleasant. Then they start to avoid the places they've had a panic attack. Then they end up not being able to go anywhere. So then Tiamat has come back, right? A huge monster, a little victim. And so what do you do with them? Well, there's no saying, no, there's no Tiamat. That's done, right? Their naivety is over. They've had a direct contact with the threat of mortality and social judgment. They've met the terrible mother and they've met the terrible father. And there's no going back. There's no saying, oh, the world is safe. It's not safe. Not at all. It's not safe. The fact that you think it's safe means that you were living in an unconscious bubble that was sort of provided to you by your culture. It's a gift. And now that's been shattered. And so now what do you do? Well, the answer is you retreat until you're in your house and there's nowhere you can go. You're the ultimate frozen rabbit, right? And your life is hell because you can't function. The alternative is, let's take apart the things you're afraid of. Let's expose you to them, carefully and programmatically. And then you'll learn that you're actually tougher than you think. You never knew that. And maybe you didn't want to take on the responsibility because, people play a role in their own demise, so to speak. When you had opportunity to go out and explore or withdraw because you were afraid, you chose to withdraw because you were afraid. So it's not only that you were overprotected often, it's that you were willing to take advantage of the fact that you were overprotected and run back there whenever you had the opportunity. So maybe you're a kid in the playground, right, and you're having some trouble with other kids, and in the back of your mind, I should deal with this myself, but you go and tell your mom and get her to intervene. And you know that that's not right. You know that you're breaking the social contract, but it's easier, and so that's what you do. You run off to an authority figure and hide behind the Great Father, roughly speaking. Well, the problem with that is you don't learn how to do it yourself. So then you have to relearn it painfully when you're 40. So then you take people out, you say, well, what are you afraid of? Rank it from 1 to 10. So 10 is, we'll make a list of 10 things you're afraid of. The thing you're least afraid of, we'll call number 10. So we'll start with that. Okay, well, I'm afraid of elevators. Okay, well, let's look at a picture of an elevator. Let's have you imagine being in an elevator. Let's go out to an elevator and let you watch the terrible jaws of death open, because that's how you're responding to it symbolically, right? And you're going to do that at the closest proximity you can manage. You find out, you go do that, it works. You're nervous as hell, especially from an anticipatory perspective. Shaking. You go out, you stop, you watch it happen, and you actually calm down. You do that 10 times and it no longer bothers you. Well, what you've learned that you didn't die, but more importantly than that, you've learned that you could withstand the threat of death. That's what you've learned. And then you move a little closer, and then you move a little closer, and then you move a little closer, and finally you're back in what's no longer the elevator from a symbolic perspective. It's a tomb, right? It's a place of enclosure and isolation. And you learn, turns out I can withstand that. And then you're much more together, much more confident. And that's often one of the things that often happens in situations like that. I've seen this multiple times, is that if you run someone through an exposure training process like that and toughen them up, they'll often start standing up to people around them in a way they never did before, because they wouldn't stand up for themselves before because they weren't willing to undermine the protection. See, if you're protecting me, I can't bother you because I can't afford to forsake your protection. So if I'm going to play that game, I'm going to hide behind you, then I can't challenge you. So that's no good, because that's sometimes why people, you see this with guys very frequently, they're still deathly afraid of their father's judgment when they're in their 30s or 40s. It's like, well, why? No, because they still want to believe that there's someone out there that knows. And so they're willing to accept the subjugation because it doesn't force them to challenge the idea that there's someone out there that knows. Because that's the advantage of having your father as a judge, right? Because he knows. Well, what if he doesn't? What if no one knows any better than you? Well, that's a rough thing. You don't, until you realize that, you're not an adult, right? That's really technically the point of realization of adulthood, is that no one actually knows what you should do more than you do. I mean, it's a horrible realization, because what the hell do you know? It's a terrible realization, and people will often pick slavery, permanent slavery, to the spirit of the Great Father, let's say, over that realization, and it's completely understandable. But the problem with it is that there's more to you than you think, and so if you continue to hide behind that figure, then you never have a chance to understand that there's more to you than you think, far more to you than you think. Maybe there's enough to you so that you can actually withstand the threat of mortality without collapsing. Maybe even withstand the threat of malevolence without collapsing. Who knows? It's certainly possible. And it's not an abstract question. It's exactly the sort of question that you address in the psychotherapeutic process. It's always the question that you address. And the answer is often in the affirmative, because people can get unbelievably tough. And you know that because people work in emergency wards in hospitals, right? Or they work in palliative care wards, or they work as mortuary assistants. I mean, these people have bloody rough jobs, you know, or they're on the front line of police investigation into, you know, heinous child abuse crimes, and so they're confronting malevolence on a regular basis. And, you know, those are very stressful jobs, but people do them. And some people do them without even being damaged by them, although that's a harder thing, because you can see horrible things, you know, things you'll never forget.